playbook. Of the over 150 cases filed against the administration, some form of injunctive relief has been ordered in only 46 cases, and of those, only 17 were nationwide, or 1/3 of them, which shows that the courts are appropriately balancing all of the factors in the different cases. I call on my colleagues to take down the wanted posters with judges' faces on them outside of offices and House office buildings, temper their discourse when it comes to judges who are just doing their job, stop the calls for impeachment, and oppose this very unfit bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
What made this exchange so explosive is that it started with Republicans demanding public denunciations of threats against GOP members of Congress, and that is a legitimate issue. But Jamie Raskin's response was to ask an even more dangerous question. Why is there such urgency when Republican lawmakers feel threatened, but hesitation, silence, or excuses when federal judges, court staff, and even family members are targeted after ruling against Donald Trump or his allies? This wasn't just a fight about rhetoric. It was a fight about the rule of law itself. Because at the exact moment Republicans were pushing legislation to weaken nationwide injunctions, one of the court's main tools for stopping potentially unlawful executive actions, judges were being vilified online, targeted with intimidation campaigns, and in some cases linked to threats against their families. Raskin's argument was simple. You cannot claim to defend public officials from threats while tolerating a political atmosphere that puts judges in the crosshairs.
We have members who have to wear, yes, it is about, they brought up the threats, ma'am.
Yeah.
This is, and
Madam Chair, I'd like to say,
it is my time.
Will you please denounce Trump for sending a mob here on January 6th?
January 6th is not happening right now. The threats are happening right now.
Nobody denounced that on your side.
And it's my time, ma'am, sir. But I would suggest that when you start talking about these threats,
yes,
that you talk about both sides. And I suggest that you talk to your side, because you have been talking about January 6th for a very long time.
Will you denounce the threats against the judges?
I don't think anyone should be threatened. I don't think there should be wanted posters out there. But these are serious. I mean, we have members who have to wear bulletproof vests because of the Democrats coming after them.
Well, but I've had,
so
I have several judicial restraining orders against people who have threatened me. So I can relate to what you're talking about.
Then you need to talk about all of them instead of sitting here in front of us saying that this is threats. And so I appreciate that you are going to denounce them and you're going to work with your side. I'm quoting the Chief Justice of the United States of America, who wrote about it in his annual report. You talked about the threats. You brought it up. And they are serious against members of this body, Republican members of this body. And so I would appreciate it when you start talking about those things, that you talk about both sides. You're aware that Democrats have received those threats too. So I recognize that all of us have. Then we should all denounce it. We should all work against it, not just in the legislative branch, but the judicial branch as well. I think the threats and what has been going on to our Republican members of Congress in the last month or so is inexcusable. I mean, when they have like the guillotine out in front, they're having to wear bulletproof vests because of the threats against them. And I recognize there's other threats, but this is right now, this is coming from an organized group of Democrats who are doing this. Yes, it is.
That was the pivot. Raskin refused to let the conversation stay narrow. He essentially argued that threats do not become outrageous only when they target one party. And once January 6th enters the conversation, so does the question of memory. Who spent years downplaying the most violent attack on Congress in modern American history, and who is now demanding immediate moral clarity over today's threats? The point here is not to minimize threats against Republican lawmakers. It is to expose the asymmetry. If political violence is always wrong, then it must be condemned when it targets judges, police officers, Democrats, Republicans, and anyone carrying out a constitutional duty. Raskin's broader accusation was that some Republicans want to separate those categories, to treat threats against their side as intolerable, while dismissing threats against judges as collateral damage in a political war over Trump's agenda.
Hey, everybody. It's Congressman Jamie Raskin. You guys know I'm the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. I just got back from a session where our Republican colleagues are now trying to dismantle the power of the courts. The courts, the independent judiciary, of course, is a major bulwark against everything that Donald Trump and Elon Musk are trying to do in demolishing federal agencies and departments, freezing the spending of federal funds on appropriated purposes, and just generally violating, trampling the Constitution and the rights of the people, including in the birthright citizenship matter, where they just want to nullify the first sentence of the 14th Amendment. Anyway, they came up with a whole bunch of bills meant to just sweep the judiciary out of the way. One of them is called the No Rogue Rulings Act, which would say that federal constitutional injunctions by a United States District Court cannot apply nationally. And they had a very amusing chart that they put up showing that the number of federal injunctions imposed against the Trump administration, even in just the first 6 weeks, is dramatically higher than any prior administration, whether we're talking Biden or Reagan or Bush or Obama or what have you. There have already been 46 temporary restraining orders or preliminary injunctions issued by federal courts. And so they were putting the chart up to show how unfairly Donald Trump is being treated. He's such a victim of this runaway imperial judiciary. Well, in fact, it proves just the opposite, that he's engaged in terribly lawless and irresponsible violations of people's rights. And whether that's trying to nullify the citizenship of millions of people by deleting the birthright citizenship clause, or dismantling federally created, congressionally created agencies and departments like NOAA and the National Weather Service, or the Food and Drug Administration, or the Department of Education, or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. All of these were created by Congress through an exercise of our lawmaking power. If anybody is going to destroy the Food and Drug Administration, or the State Department, or the Department of Education, it will be the Congress of the United States.
Here is the deeper layer of the story. Raskin's argument is not simply that Republicans are upset with judges. It is that they are upset because judges are still functioning as an independent check. Courts appointed by presidents from both parties have blocked or paused actions they found unconstitutional or illegal. Instead of answering the legal reasoning, Trump and many of his defenders have often answered with branding, rogue judges, radical left judges, or calls for impeachment. That matters because language creates permission structures. If judges are framed as enemies rather than constitutional referees, then hostility toward them no longer sounds shocking to the base. It sounds justified. And once that line is crossed, threats don't emerge from nowhere. They grow out of a political culture that treats adverse rulings not as part of democracy, but as sabotage. That is the hypocrisy Raskin was trying to pin down in public, in real time, on camera.
Just in conclusion, I'm very aware of the strain that this kind of thing would put on our courts, but I'm more concerned about the strain that it puts on the people whose civil rights are being violated by these orders, and the burden it puts on them to each one get representation.
No, I think, we had this exchange before Ms. Fishbach left, but I do want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record. This is one floor below my office, in front of Representative Ogle's office, wanted posters of judges. It says, "Known Get Trump Judicial Activists Wanted." And this is the kind of stuff that some of us are asking there to be universal condemnation about. I mean, this is threatening to these judges. It has no place in the halls of Congress. I ask unanimous consent to it.
Not only would we want that, but
without
this
objection.
committee has had a
And I
long
would yield
history of
back.
providing security. We are currently redacting the addresses and other information. So the one place that you'll find we won't be in front of you except united is on the security of the judges.
Can we get some agreement that members who put these posters up in front of their offices will take them down?
I don't believe we should be putting up pictures of judges.
And I thank Mr. Issa for saying that. I would hope also that all of the calls to impeach judges because members disagree with their opinions should be retracted, or at least that should cease immediately, because that is creating the climate in
We
which
should all be able to condemn this.
I think everybody should condemn condemn that. I'm glad to hear Mr. Issa agrees that that should not be going up. But I think the whole thing about talking about impeaching judges who ruled in the birthright citizenship case, or impeaching judges who are protecting our Social Security data, is very dangerous. And look, Judge Boasberg's daughter has been the subject of an online campaign of vilification and intimidation, and Justice Barrett's sister got a
Thank
death
you,
threat.
Mr. Raskin. Thank you very much. I want to say, but I believe for all Republicans, we do not condone any calls for violence against anyone. Anyone. We do not condone any calls for violence against anyone, period. Mr. Langworthy, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Mr. Issa, I thank you for bringing this legislation forward. I'm proud to co-sponsor it with you. I join the chorus here condemning violence against any elected official. We are all popularly elected in our districts. I mean, there should be no violence geared towards anyone. There should not be any violence geared towards anyone in the judiciary in this country. I think that should really go without saying and be universal. But I think as many as my colleagues do, there's a growing trend on these nationwide injunctions that is shaking the confidence of the American people in the judiciary to fairly and effectively do its job. And I think that this legislation is a step in the right direction there. Is there anything, with all the conversation that's happened here so far, that you would like to add, Mr. Issa?
Thank you, sir. I would just try to reiterate that in the last administration, the Solicitor General, on behalf of the administration, it may not be on behalf of the Judiciary Committee's minority, but they called for an end to these excesses, and Congressman Jones offered a bill that would be substantially the same as this one, except, quite frankly, bringing even more of an end. So I think we're really dealing in, maybe people don't want it when it's not their president, and they do want it when it is their president. But like so many things, if you do the right thing, as we change back and forth between majorities and minority, between presidents, we'll have done the right thing. We protect all judges, both with the Marshal Service and now with additional judges, or additional protection after things like the home addresses of judges being put on the internet and so on. The same thing goes here. We're protecting every administration by not having this continued growth. I will note, somebody said all of a sudden, but I held the first hearing on this subject in 2017.
And this is where the optics become devastating for Republicans. Because the hearing was supposed to showcase concern about threats against lawmakers. Instead, Democrats forced the conversation onto something impossible to ignore: judges' faces on wanted posters in the halls around Congress itself. Even more damaging, some Republicans agreed that was unacceptable. That bipartisan moment is important. It means Raskin was not making a fringe argument. He was pointing to conduct that even some members on the other side could not comfortably defend. But then he went one step further. He tied those posters to the larger campaign to delegitimize judges altogether. The impeachment talk, the accusations of treason, the idea that any ruling against Trump must be evidence of corruption. Once that narrative takes hold, posters are no longer just posters. They become signals. They tell the public who the enemies are supposed to be.
The chart is fascinating because the gentleman seems to imply, if you keep it up, that would be great, because the implication of this chart is that somehow the courts have done something wrong rather than Donald Trump having done something wrong. The reason there are 64 injunctions against him is because he is trampling the lawmaking and spending powers of the Congress of the United States. He's violating the civil service rights of federal workers, and he's betraying the federal law in every particular way. If anything, that chart demonstrates precisely why we need the law to be exactly as it is. The whole purpose of temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions is to stop actions by government that are causing irreparable harm, where there is a likelihood of the plaintiff to succeed on the merits of the case. And so the neutral law that my good friend from California is hoping for actually exists right now. This is the way it's always been. And so I don't know how many injunctions there were under Biden. I can't see. Is it 14, well, I don't know. I don't know exactly what the right number is, but if there were regulations or actions by the government under Biden that met the standards of a temporary restraining order or preliminary injunction, then that is the necessary and proper mechanism of the law. But nobody's seen anything like what Donald Trump has been doing. As Donald Trump told us last night, you might love it, you might hate it, but as he said, it's radically unprecedented for the executive branch of government to go in to try to hollow out the federal government of the United States. So look, from our perspective, when Donald Trump says we're going to freeze all spending that has been appropriated by the Congress of the United States of America, that is a violation of our spending power, right? An Appropriations Act is a federal law, just like the law that says you can't beat up federal officers. An Appropriations Act is a federal law. It's not a budgetary recommendation to the president. And it might be right, it might be wrong, it might be the smartest appropriation in the world, it might be the dumbest appropriation in the world, but it is the appropriation of the Congress of the United States. And so the courts rightfully were saying, no, you have no power just to randomly, arbitrarily, unilaterally, monarchically freeze the spending of the Congress of the United States. We are the lawmaking power. So the gentleman's bill invites us basically to destroy a mechanism which is available to all Americans, and which, by the way, they freely availed themselves of under President Biden. There's a judge in Texas who became famous, although I can't remember his name. Somebody will tell me. Kaczmarek. Judge Kaczmarek, who issued repeated nationwide injunctions to implement a right-wing agenda. The problem there, of course, was forum shopping, court shopping, judge shopping. But if the case had actually been properly before him, then and he was properly interpreting the law, which he was not, but it would necessarily lie that it should apply to everybody across the country. I mean, this is like saying in Brown versus Board of Education that the desegregation order should apply only to Linda Brown and the other plaintiffs in the case, as opposed to applying everybody in the country. That just doesn't make any sense. So we're going to oppose this very strongly. The bill is a betrayal of what, in fact, is objective, neutral, procedural mechanisms in the law that are well understood. And if it's unconstitutional for people in New York or Texas or Louisiana or California, it's unconstitutional for everybody in the country if it's a federal policy. Happy to yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
The Republican argument is that nationwide injunctions give too much power to individual district judges. And on paper, that sounds like a process debate. But in practice, Raskin's warning is that the bill lands at a very specific political moment, right when Trump is losing repeatedly in court. So the question becomes, is this really a neutral reform? Or is it retaliation against the only institution still slowing executive overreach? That is why Raskin framed the bill as unworkable and dangerous. If a nationwide executive action harms millions of people, forcing each person to sue separately does not create justice. It creates exhaustion. It favors the government, the powerful, and the wealthy. And if courts can no longer stop allegedly unlawful action at scale, then the practical message to the executive branch is simple. Move fast, break the rules, and dare ordinary citizens to keep up. Jamie Raskin's strongest line was never just about hypocrisy as an insult. It was about hypocrisy as a warning sign. A democracy cannot survive if threats are condemned selectively, if judges are respectable only when they rule your way, or if constitutional checks are attacked the moment they become inconvenient. In this clash, Raskin was arguing that the real scandal is not simply the bad blood inside one hearing room. It is the normalization of a politics where intimidation is tolerated as long as it serves the right target. And once that becomes normal, the danger is no longer limited to one party, one judge, or one headline. It reaches the courts, the Congress, and eventually the rule of law itself. If political violence is wrong, then it is wrong all the way through, not just when it hits your side.